My family called me selfish. Funny how quiet it got when I closed every account. So last Sunday, I brought lasagna to my parents' house, the real kind, layered with ricotta and patience, thinking maybe, just maybe, we could act like a normal family for once. I even picked up a bottle of Merlot I couldn't really afford because I still believed small gestures could fix big cracks. Turns out I was wrong, dead wrong. When I walked in, Mom barely looked up from her phone. The kitchen smelled like takeout. Greasy wings, not exactly the family dinner she'd texted about. My brother Ethan stood by the counter, bragging about some new client for the construction business, while Dad nodded like it was gospel. No one asked about my day or the 2-hour drive I just made. But I smiled anyway, because that's what you do when you've spent your whole life trying to earn a seat at a table that never really wanted you. We sat down. My lasagna was steaming, the bread still warm. I placed it in the middle of the table, right next to the takeout boxes Ethan had dumped there like trophies. Mom poked her fork into one of his fries and said, "Now this is real food." The table laughed. Not cruelly, but the kind of laughter that tells you you're the joke. I laughed too, just enough to pass as fine. But inside I felt something tiny snap, like a thread pulled too tight. They talked about the upcoming family reunion in Portland, flights, hotel rooms, matching shirts. A group chat I'd never been invited to. I waited for a pause, any gap to slip in a word. When it came, I said as calmly as I could, "Just tell me when the reunion is. I'll book early this time." That's when Ethan leaned back, chewed his fry, and said without even looking at me, "You don't need to come. You're not really family anymore." It wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. It was casual, effortless cruelty. The kind you can't defend yourself against because it pretends to be a joke. Dad chuckled, slapped his knee. Mom tried not to smile and failed. I looked at each of them, waiting for someone, anyone, to say, "That's too far." No one did. I didn't throw my wine. I didn't scream. I just folded my napkin, stood up, and said, "Well, guess that saves me a plane ticket." The room went silent except for the hum of the fridge. I grabbed my coat, picked up my lasagna, still warm, still perfect, and walked out. Nobody stopped me. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but it felt cleaner than the air I'd just left. Driving home, I kept replaying it in my head. His tone, their laughter, the way no one defended me. I used to think silence was peace. That night, I realized it was complicity. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just drove with both hands tight on the wheel, thinking about how love shouldn't feel like begging for crumbs. I'd spent years wiring money to that family business, covering Ethan's messes, paying off temporary loans that never came back. And yet one dinner was all it took for them to erase me. When I got home, I set the lasagna on my counter. The smell filled the apartment, but I couldn't bring myself to eat it. It felt like bringing back a ghost. I sat down, turned off my phone, and listened to the silence. It wasn't peaceful, not yet. It was the kind that hums under your skin, the kind that says something big just broke, and you're not sure what it was, them or you. I thought they'd call. They didn't, not that night, not the next. The only message I got came 2 days later, from Ethan. "Hey, weird question. Did your bank maybe block the transfer? Loan payment didn't go through." I stared at the text, laughed once. That sharp, humorless kind of laugh that sounds like a crack forming. Then I typed 4 words, "Not family, not funded," and hit send. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't know it yet, but that text was the first time in 30 years I'd ever told my brother no, and it felt good, terrifying, but good. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of that same Merlot. It tasted different, not bitter, not sweet, just honest, like truth after a long lie. I remember thinking, maybe peace doesn't arrive with forgiveness. Maybe it starts when you stop financing people who mistake your kindness for obligation. Outside, it started to rain, a soft drizzle tapping against my window. I looked at the lasagna sitting on the counter, the one no one touched, and thought, maybe next time, I'll eat alone on purpose. What I didn't know was that this wasn't the end of the humiliation. It was just the opening act. Because people like Ethan, they don't stop taking until you make them. The weird thing about silence is that it's loud when you're waiting for someone to care. After that dinner, I thought at least Mom would text. Maybe something like, "He didn't mean it, sweetie," or "We were just joking." But no, not a word. The phone stayed quiet, like it had joined their side too. I tried to distract myself. Laundry, work emails, even rearranged my kitchen shelves. anything to fill the space where their voices used to live. On the third night, I opened the wine from that dinner and poured myself a glass. It tasted different, colder, like guilt that didn't belong to me anymore. Then the next morning, a ping. My heart jumped, stupidly hopeful. It was from Ethan. Hey, weird question. Did your bank maybe block the transfer? The payment didn't go through. I read it twice. My jaw clenched. No, how are you? No, sorry about the other night. Just money. I typed back. Not family, not funded. Hit send before I could overthink it. I swear I felt something shift in the air after that. Small, invisible, like a door quietly closing behind me. Later that day, I logged into my banking app, mostly just to prove to myself that I still had control over something. But when I scrolled through my transactions, my stomach dropped. There were payments I didn't recognize, transfers I hadn't made, same amounts, same company name, Morgan Construction LLC, my family's business. I clicked one, then another. The dates lined up perfectly with Ethan's loan repayments. Except I wasn't the one approving them. Someone had been using my account. At first, I told myself maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I helped once or twice and didn't remember. But then I noticed the memo lines. They were written in perfect cursive. My name signed at the bottom, Claire M., except the M curved too neatly, too clean. My handwriting wasn't that polite. That's when the nausea hit. I called the bank, sat through 30 minutes of hold music while the agent said things like, "Ma'am, are you sure you didn't authorize this?" And, "Do you share accounts with your family?" Each question felt like a slap. Finally, the agent said she'd file a fraud claim and flag the transactions. She sounded sorry, not for me, but for the paperwork she'd have to do. When the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my reflection in the black surface of my coffee. There's this special kind of heartbreak when you realize the people you die for wouldn't even call you before using your name. I didn't cry, I just started laughing, quiet at first, then uncontrollable. The kind of laugh that's half hysteria, half clarity. It wasn't funny, but it was so absurd it almost became one. That afternoon, I decided to visit my grandma, June. She lives 2 towns over in this tiny blue house with wind chimes that sound like rain. She opened the door before I even knocked. "Took you long enough," she said, same as she always does, like she's been expecting me before I even knew I'd come. We sat at her kitchen table, the safe kind of table, where the chairs don't judge you. She poured me tea and waited. I told her everything, the dinner, the text, the money. She didn't flinch once, just nodded, slow, like she'd been waiting for the story to finally make sense. When I finished, she sighed and said, "You know, honey, people who drink from your kindness too long forget it's not a fountain, it's a well, and wells run dry." That hit me so hard I had to look away. She reached over, patted my hand. "Don't let them guilt you for putting the lid back on." I smiled, or tried to. But inside I was boiling. I thought about all the times I'd bailed Ethan out. His rent when he forgot to pay. His DUI lawyer, his credit card bills. Even the down payment on his truck. Every time he said, "You're the responsible one, Claire. You understand how money works." Yeah, apparently I didn't. That night I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and went through every old statement I could find. Bank transfers, Venmo logs, PayPal receipts. My name was everywhere. My money gone, scattered across 2 years of family emergencies. The total made my throat close. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. I thought about calling my parents, demanding an explanation, but I knew how that would go. Dad would sigh and say I was being dramatic. Mom would beg me not to make things worse. And Ethan, he'd probably just send me a thumbs up emoji. So I didn't call. I printed the statements instead. Highlighted every transaction. Yellow marker across the lies. My apartment smelled like ink and betrayal. The next morning, I got another text from Ethan. "Hey, I'm stopping by later, need to talk." I stared at it for a long time. The nerve. I didn't respond. Around 8 p.m., someone started pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding. My heart jumped. Then I heard Dad's voice. "Claire, open up." Behind him, Ethan's deeper tone. "Stop acting crazy, we just need to talk." Crazy, there it was, the family favorite word for any woman who stops saying yes. I didn't move. I just stood there, cup of tea in my hand, listening to the pounding echo through the apartment. I could almost see their faces on the other side, angry, self-righteous, certain they still had control. 10 minutes later, the knocking stopped. A car engine started, tires squealed, silence returned. Heavier this time, but cleaner. I looked down at my reflection in the tea and whispered, "You're not crazy." Then, because I needed to believe it, I said it again, louder. After they left, I sat on the floor surrounded by papers, statements, receipts, screenshots. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was awake. Funny thing is, when you start setting boundaries, the people who fed off your lack of them will call it cruelty. But it's not cruelty, it's correction. That night, I made myself a small promise. I wasn't going to fix their messes anymore. Not with money, not with silence, not with pretending. I was done bleeding for people who never once noticed the wound. The next morning, I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and typed fraud attorney near me. Because apparently, family doesn't end when you stop loving them. It ends when you start holding them accountable. 2 days after they pounded on my door, I got a call from an unknown number while I was at work. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something in me said, "Answer." The voice on the other end was polite, almost apologetic. "Hi, this is Melissa from Greenline Bank. I just wanted to verify some information regarding your recent loan application." My stomach dropped. "What loan application?" I asked. She hesitated, and that half-second of silence said everything. "It's a personal loan under your name, $8,000 signed last week." I felt the air leave my body. My voice came out calm, too calm. "Can you send me the signature you have on file?" She agreed, emailed it while I was still on the phone. When I opened the PDF, I swear my hands went cold. It was my name, but not my hand. The loops were perfect, neat, the kind of forged confidence only a family member would think they could pull off. I asked for the address on file. It was my parents' house, the same place I'd walked out of with my lasagna a week ago. Melissa sounded nervous now. "Would you like to file a fraud claim?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said before I could stop myself. "I'd like to do a lot more than that." After I hung up, I sat there in my office cubicle, staring at my reflection in the black computer screen. I wasn't just angry, I was embarrassed. Embarrassed for being so predictable, so easy to use. All those years of being the responsible one, the one who could be trusted with signatures and paperwork. I'd basically handed them the blueprint for the crime. That night, I called a lawyer, not a friend of a friend, not some family contact. A real fraud attorney I found through Google, the kind with Yelp reviews that used words like relentless and merciless. Her name was Karen Lee, and she didn't waste time with pity. After I explained everything, she said, "You're not overreacting. What they did is criminal." I let out a shaky laugh. "Criminal? That's my family." She replied matter of fact, "Then it's criminal family." She helped me start gathering everything. Bank statements, text messages, screenshots, emails, even those stupid loan reminders Ethan used to send with thumbs-up emojis. When I sent her the forged loan document, she called me back instantly. "You're lucky you caught this early," she said. "They were probably planning more." That night I barely slept. I kept seeing the signature in my head, over and over, that clean, precise curve of my name. I'd always been the messy one, scribbling notes, signing receipts with half a letter, but this one looked practiced. It wasn't the first time. The next morning, I went to my grandma's again. She was outside tending her little garden, trimming roses in her flannel robe like she was auditioning for a retirement home calendar. I told her what happened. She didn't say "I told you so." She just listened, then wiped her hands on her robe and said, "Your daddy once said something to me years ago. Said if he ever lost your trust, he'd take your name instead. Guess he meant it literally." I felt my throat close. I couldn't tell if she was joking or not. She looked me dead in the eye. "You're not the crazy one, Claire. You're the honest one. And honest people make liars uncomfortable." Her words stuck with me. I drove home and sat in the parking lot for an hour, scrolling through photos on my phone. Birthdays, family barbecues, Christmas mornings. Smiles that looked real at the time but now felt staged. Background noise of manipulation disguised as tradition. By the end of the week, my lawyer had sent a formal cease and desist letter to Morgan Construction LLC. It wasn't dramatic, just 4 pages of calm legal fire, warning them to cease using my name, return all funds, and prepare for investigation. I printed a copy for myself and framed it on my fridge like a diploma. It felt like a piece of armor. 2 days later, Dad called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail anyway. "Claire, this is ridiculous. You're blowing things out of proportion. Ethan was just handling some business and maybe he made a mistake, but that's family. You don't bring lawyers into family." I played it twice, then sent the audio to Karen. She texted back, "Good, that's pressure. We'll use it." Then came Mom's turn. Her message was shorter, softer. "Sweetheart, you know how your brother is. He didn't mean to hurt you. Let's just talk this out like adults. Adults, I almost laughed. Because when it came to me, they never saw an adult. Just the dependable daughter, the fixer, the safety net. The one who never made a scene. That weekend, I went through every file tied to the family business. Found old contracts I'd helped draft, tax forms, payroll documents, all with my signature. Except a few weren't mine. My chest tightened. This wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. I met Karen again on Monday. She laid everything out on her desk. Highlighted statements, printed emails, a color-coded timeline. They've been using your name for at least 2 years, she said. And not just for loans, utility accounts, tax filings, even supplier contracts. My voice barely came out. You're saying my family's been committing fraud with my name for years? Karen looked at me carefully. Yes, and if we don't stop it now, the IRS will come for you next, not them. That's when something inside me finally snapped. But it wasn't rage this time. It was clarity. That night, I called Ethan. He picked up like nothing happened. Hey sis, glad you called. You get my texts? Yeah, I said, voice steady. I also got a call from the bank. Silence. A small exhale. Oh, that, yeah, I handled it. Just a mix-up. You forged my name. Whoa, don't throw around words like that. It was just easier that way. You know how slow you are with paperwork. My hand shook, but my voice didn't. Ethan, I've got a lawyer. For the first time, he sounded scared. A lawyer? Jesus, Claire, we're family. Exactly, I said. And family doesn't need lawyers, right? So maybe stop acting like one. He hung up. That night, my phone lit up with messages. Mom, Dad, even an aunt I hadn't heard from in years, all trying to guilt-trip me into keeping it private. I ignored them all. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and listened to the rain again. Same rain as before, but it didn't sound sad this time. It sounded like applause. A week later, my lawyer called to tell me the bank had confirmed the forgery and reversed the loan. Ethan and Dad had to pay it back immediately to avoid prosecution. I didn't feel joy, just peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from finally walking away clean. Grandma called that evening. You did it, didn't you? Yeah, I said softly. It's over. She chuckled. No, honey, it's just beginning. Once you stop letting people take from you, they'll start showing you who they really are. She was right, because that night, an email popped up from my family's company accountant. The subject line read, termination of employment, my name, my job, gone. I laughed, out loud this time, the kind of laugh that echoes in an empty apartment and feels like freedom. Let them think they fired me. The truth was, I'd already quit the moment I stopped apologizing for being right. It had been about a month since the whole mess blew up. My lawyer closed the case, the bank confirmed the repayment, and the last of the family's calls finally stopped coming in. My apartment felt quieter than ever, not empty, just still. It's funny how peace sounds awkward at first when you've lived your whole life surrounded by chaos. Then one morning, a thick white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew that handwriting anywhere. My mom's perfect cursive. The kind that looked like it belonged on wedding invitations, not apologies. I stood there in my hallway for a solid minute before opening it. Inside was a glossy invitation card, the kind they used to send out for charity galas, gold foil letters, family crest at the top. Morgan family reunion, a new beginning. There was a short note tucked inside. Mom's words. Claire, we miss you. It's time to rebuild. We've talked things through and want to make amends. There's even a repayment plan we'd like to show you. Please come home. Repayment plan. My God, they could have just said, we're sorry, but no, it had to sound like a business meeting. I laughed so hard I scared my cat off the couch. Still, I kept reading. Near the bottom, Dad had scrawled his own addition, a single line, family means forgiveness. I folded the note, slid it back in, and set it on the counter next to my coffee mug. For a second, I almost felt that old ache, that instinct to fix things, to be the good daughter again, but the feeling didn't last. That weekend, I drove to Grandma June's house. She was sitting on the porch with her favorite mug, the one that said, World's Okayest Grandma. I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her lips tightening into something between a smirk and a sigh. They really don't get it, do they? She said finally. I shook my head. They think money solves everything. She leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed. Money's just guilt with paper on it. They're trying to buy back your silence. That sentence hit me straight in the chest, because she was right. They didn't want my forgiveness. They wanted my compliance. That night, I sat at her kitchen table, same one I'd cried at weeks earlier. She poured us both a glass of iced tea and asked, "You gonna go?" I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, "No. I've already been to that reunion my whole life. I just didn't realize it." She chuckled, clinked her glass to mine. "Good. Let them talk to the empty chair for once." The following Monday, I wrote my own letter. Just 1 page, handwritten. I didn't curse, didn't accuse. I wanted my words to sting in the quiet way truth always does. It read, "I'm not coming. Consider every dollar I ever gave you forgiven. What's not forgiven is how you spent my trust like it was interest-free. I hope you find peace, but I won't be the one funding it. Claire." I sealed it, mailed it, and felt lighter than I had in years. A week later, my mom called. I let it ring out the first few times, but eventually, curiosity got the better of me. When I answered, she sounded tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from finally realizing something you can't undo. "I got your letter," she said softly. "It was fair." That word, fair, almost made me laugh, but I stayed quiet. Then she added, "Your father's angry, Ethan's ashamed, though he'll never admit it. I just wanted you to know, I am sorry." There was something raw in her voice, something that made me believe she meant it. For a second, I almost softened. Almost. "Mom," I said quietly, "I forgive you, but I'm not coming back." There was a long pause on the line. "I understand," she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I think she actually did. A few weeks later, I saw the reunion photos online, because of course they posted them. Big fancy dinner, matching blue shirts, twinkle lights. Everyone smiling like they hadn't just burned their own house down emotionally. And right there, in the middle of the group shot, was an empty chair, dead center, my spot. Someone must have moved it there on purpose. Maybe Mom, or maybe they just couldn't bring themselves to erase it. Either way, that picture said everything I needed to know. I didn't belong at that table anymore. And that was okay. That night, Ryan came over with takeout. Thai food and a cheap bottle of white wine. We ate on my couch, laughing about a new show on Netflix, and for once, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. At one point, he looked around my little apartment and said, "It's peaceful here, like real peace, not the quiet before an argument kind." I smiled. Yeah, I guess that's what happens when you stop inviting chaos to dinner. Later, I sat by the window, scrolling through the reunion photo again. My thumb hovered over the empty chair. I zoomed in until it filled the screen. The white cushion glowing under fairy lights, perfectly untouched. I whispered to myself, "That's not my absence. That's my boundary." And somehow that thought felt like the truest thing I'd ever said. A week after that, a small package arrived from Grandma. Inside was a folded napkin embroidered with my initials, CM, and a note that said, "Every woman needs her own tablecloth." It made me laugh, but also tear up. She always knew the right metaphors. I took that napkin, laid it on my little dining table, and set 1 plate, 1 glass, 1 fork. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, took a deep breath, and toasted the quiet. It didn't feel lonely, it felt earned, because peace isn't the absence of family. It's the presence of boundaries. 3 months later, my life felt different. Not glamorous, not miraculous, just mine. The kind of different you don't notice at first. Like when you stop clenching your jaw after years of grinding your teeth. My mornings weren't filled with phone calls or guilt anymore. I woke up to the sound of my own alarm. Made coffee that tasted like calm, not like anxiety. My job at the architecture firm had offered me a quiet promotion after everything went down. "You handle chaos better than most," my boss had joked. I didn't correct him, but in my head, I thought, because I was raised in it. One Saturday morning, I decided to drive up to Asheville for a hike. It had rained the night before, and the mountains smelled like wet pine and new beginnings. Ryan came with me, carrying his camera as always. He didn't talk much, he never did, but he had this way of letting silence feel safe. Somewhere along the trail, he turned to me and said, "You know, you smile differently now." I laughed. "What does that mean?" "It's like you're not waiting for someone to ruin your day anymore." That line stayed with me. After the hike, we stopped at a little diner. One of those old places with vinyl booths and bad coffee that somehow feels like home. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with eyeliner thicker than my patience used to be, asked if we wanted pie. Ryan said yes before I could answer. "You're gonna want to hear her story," he whispered when she walked away. Turns out, she'd owned that diner for 40 years. When her husband left, he tried to take it from her, said she couldn't handle business. She fought him in court, won, and painted the walls yellow the next day. "So I'd remember Sunshine's mine too," she said with a wink. I don't know why, but that moment hit me hard. Because that's exactly what healing feels like. Not fireworks, not grand revenge. Just repainting your own walls and realizing the light belongs to you again. That night, back home, I found another letter in my mailbox. Smaller envelope this time. The return address said Morgan Construction. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Inside was a check, $500. No note, just the signature, Dad's, in his perfect accountant handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before smiling. It wasn't a peace offering. It was guilt money. A last-ditch effort to buy a conscience. So I took a photo of it and sent it to Mom with one line. "Tell Dad I don't cash IOUs," written in shame. She didn't reply. But a week later, a small postcard arrived. It was from her. A picture of her garden, daisies blooming under summer sun. On the back she'd written, "I planted some peace lilies. You were right. They grow better when they're left alone." I laughed through tears when I read that. Because maybe, just maybe, she was starting to get it. That evening, I cooked dinner. Not lasagna this time, but something simple. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and Ryan's favorite green beans. I set the table, the same one where I'd eaten countless takeout meals alone. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a symbol of loneliness. It felt earned. I took out Grandma June's embroidered napkin, the one with my initials, and placed it next to my plate. Then I added an extra chair across from mine. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Expecting someone?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Just kindness." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're something else, Claire." When we sat down to eat, he raised his glass. "To peace," he said. "To boundaries," I corrected. We clinked glasses, and the sound was light. Not celebratory, not heavy, just right. Later that night, I journaled for the first time in months. I wrote, "Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's knowing which voices deserve to stay." I closed the book, took a deep breath, and looked around my apartment. The plants thriving on the windowsill, the framed photo of me and Grandma at the farmer's market. The small stack of mail that wasn't bills or threats anymore. Everything was ordinary, and I loved it that way. The next morning, I went to visit Grandma. She was sitting on her porch again, knitting something soft and gray. "You look lighter," she said before I even sat down. "I think I finally stopped mistaking endurance for love," I said. She smiled that knowing smile. "Took you long enough." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas. Then I asked, "Do you think they'll ever change?" She took a long sip of her lemonade. "Maybe, but that's their job now, not yours." Something in me let go right then. Not forgiveness this time, just release. When I got home that evening, I looked at the extra chair by my table. It didn't look empty anymore. It looked like space. Space for whoever comes next, whoever shows up with kindness, not conditions. And maybe that's what healing really is. Learning that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Now when people ask about my family, I tell them the truth. Not the edited polite version, but the real one. "Yeah, we had a rough fallout," I say. "But sometimes you've got to lose the wrong people to find the right peace." Then I smile, because that's exactly what I did. So if you're listening to this and you've been there, the black sheep, the peacemaker, the one who's always too much or too responsible, I want you to know this. You can walk away without hating them. You can love them from a distance and still protect your sanity. Because love without respect isn't love, it's labor. And tonight, as I sit at my own table with a glass of wine and the city lights outside my window, I finally understand something my grandma's been trying to tell me all along. Peace doesn't come when people finally treat you right. It comes when you decide you deserve it anyway. So yeah, welcome to my table. You know, looking back now, I realized this whole story wasn't really about money, betrayal, or even revenge. It was about learning the quiet kind of courage, the kind that doesn't need an audience or applause. I used to think strength meant holding the family together no matter what. But I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build peace on your own terms. Because love without respect isn't love, it's debt. People will always tell you that family is everything, but that's not true. Integrity is everything. You can forgive someone and still never let them near your peace again. You can wish them well while keeping your boundaries strong. Like they say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, not gonna happen. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. You're allowed to outgrow the people who taught you survival, but never safety. You don't owe anyone your silence just to keep the peace. Speak up, stand tall, and when the world tries to tell you that you're overreacting, remember, gold doesn't fear the fire. They finally apologized weeks later. I forgave them, but this time on my terms. So what about you? Have you ever had to cut ties to protect your peace? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your words might help someone else find their voice too. If this story hit home for you, tap that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about justice, healing, and the quiet strength it takes to start over. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and remember, sometimes losing others is how we finally find ourselves.